This is the Franchise Consultant Podcast. Each Monday, we release a new episode hosted by Adam Goldman. Adam has over 10 years of franchising experience, and he's worked hard to realize his dreams by being his own boss. His experience will help you to become a better business owner and franchisee so that you can live your best life and control your destiny. This is the Franchise Consultant Podcast, and this is Adam Goldman.
Welcome to another edition of the Franchise Consultant Podcast. This is your host, Adam Goldman. So excited to have Jay Chapman here with me today. Jay, great to see you.
Adam, great to see you again. Thank you for having me on.
Please. So I know we're both in the Entrepreneurs Organization together. Tell me a little bit more about the two companies that you run.
So just to kind of give you a little bit of backstory, Adam, I have two companies. One is a recruiting firm that we work specifically in the pharmaceutical research and development industry, which was my first company that I started. The second company is comprehensive home care, and it's a non-skilled nursing practice that we have. What we do is we go into seniors' homes or disabled children or adults and provide daily living services for them so they can live independently in their homes.
That's great. And what percent of your time do you spend with both businesses?
So with recruiting, it's an ongoing, everyday process where I'm actively still working at desk, meaning I'm out there facilitating deals, doing business development, and then also finding the candidates for our clients to meet their specific needs and expertise that they need to hire and to get therapeutics out to the public. So that's a very involved amount of time. So I would say probably 75% of what I do is recruiting related. With home care, I have an outstanding staff of people that we've hired along the way with specific line functions that are able to manage the business, the day-to-day operations. And I really provide more of a strategic oversight for them and do get involved in, some client interfacing, but not nearly as much as recruiting specifically.
And so you had a really interesting story to tell me. You're based in North Carolina, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And so you told me that your business is really booming right now in recruiting. Could you elaborate a little bit more for our listeners about which specific sub-business you're in recruiting?
Yeah, so a lot of the individuals that we work with on the recruiting side they're essential to getting, there's so many verticals within the pharmaceutical industry, but one of the specific areas that we work within, they look at how drugs interact within the body, how they can become efficacious or effective in a non-human population, and then translate that to a human population, adjusting the therapeutics so that they target whatever disease or therapeutic area that they're trying to attack. So these individuals have a very specific niche, scientific background, but they also have to have, great interpersonal skills and be able to work across multidisciplinary backgrounds for the whole team and company to achieve their goals of getting a therapeutic out to someone. Maybe it's a rare disease, maybe it's an oncology issue, maybe it's cardiovascular and metabolics, but whatever the therapeutic area, these individuals we work with work across those things so they can help their organizations get the assets out to the public.
Okay. And so how does someone enter this industry if they're not in it yet? Because I know a lot of people are potentially looking for a new gig right now.
Yeah, so in our industry specifically, from a scientific standpoint or from an entrepreneurial standpoint?
Well, I'm talking more about, it sounds like you're recruiting for jobs in medical testing, correct? And if people want to become medical testers, how does that
work? I see. Well, the individuals that we work with specifically, Adam, are very well-educated individuals. So they're, bachelor's, master's, PhD, the combination of those three together, and then usually some sort of postdoctoral training, maybe a year or two in a postdoctoral training or straight into the industry. So they spend a majority of their time and a chunk of their time dedicated to educating themselves. And then as they continue on their scientific journey in the pharmaceutical or biotech industry, they're constantly publishing, looking for novel approaches to attacking some of these diseases. It's an ongoing thing. So it really, if somebody's looking to pivot into this area, it would be fairly difficult unless they had a high level mathematics background and are typically willing to go into a master's or PhD program. So it's fairly involved from that perspective.
Which master's or PhD would they need to get? Is it in immunology or what's
generally like a pharmaceutical sciences,
okay.
And then there's specialties within pharmaceutical sciences specifically. So some people go a toxicology route, some are formulations, some are analytical chemists. I mean, there's a lot of different variations and verticals with just in the pharmaceutical sciences discipline itself. And depending on, like, when you get to the PhD level, then you're really, really specializing. You're picking a thesis that you're going to study and work on for 4 years, and that's really going to chart the course of where you're going to end up in your career.
How did you get into this? This is a very...
That's the funny part. So when I was younger, I was finishing school. I worked and went to school at the same time. I knew that my degree of study, I studied environmental sciences, and very soon after, getting into the field, I loved it. I loved the ideas of we were trying to do in terms of practicing, more sustainable environment for all of us to live in. And there's all different sorts of verticals in that space as well. But what I realized is that, for the amount of money that I'd be making and the type of work I'd be doing, I didn't know, it just didn't seem like it was going to add up to where I wanted to be at the end of the day. So toward the end of finishing my undergraduate in environmental sciences, I've started an MBA program. And at the same time, that's when Monster was the go-to, place to find a job. So like everyone at that point, I posted my resume on monster.com, received calls from recruiters, which I never even knew existed at that point. And a gentleman called me by the name of John Chapman, and he phone interviewed me. And I was looking for a sales position because I wanted something to make money so I could pay for an MBA and go into whatever I thought I was going to go into. And John explained to me that he owned a recruiting firm here in the Charlotte area, and he wanted me to come in for an on-site interview and explain what recruiting was, because I told him very specifically I had no clue. I didn't know they existed. So John gave me an opportunity to go to work for him, and I've always been grateful for that. And he and I are still friends today. So John helped me understand what recruiting was and gave me my first opportunity in the recruiting space. And that's where everything started for me.
That's great. So I'm just switching gears here. We're in the Charlotte area. Just curious what you're seeing in general. You're in recruiting. What kind of things are happening post-COVID in your local market?
Well, local market, it's a good question. I could probably speak more broadly on across the U.S. and then pharmaceutical industry specifically, if you'd like. So pre-COVID, ending 2019, which seems like 6 years ago now, but we finished up, the whole industry finished up like just a furious pace. 2019 was pedal to the metal. Everybody was grinding. Things were going great. Coming to 2020, same story, right? And then you start hearing the pandemic creeping up. Our industry pivoted and reacted very quickly, at least in the specific areas that I mentioned that I work within. A lot of historically, our industry had always been brick and mortar. If you work for that company, you go on site, you work for that company, you work with your teams. Occasionally you would have, work from home days if you have big projects, that sort of thing, and you need to just focus on those things. But a lot of the candidates we work with have always been used to, working from their corporate offices or satellite corporate office. What we found in the beginning is some of the older, more established companies, they were still resistant to having people work remotely, but the pandemic sort of forced that upon them. And to their credit, they made that switch very quickly and allowed people to work remotely from their homes. Generally, when these people are onboarded, they're given a cell phone, a laptop, access so they can work from home if they wanted to. in the evenings or what have you. But what ended up happening is, I think they were pretty early on with the industry as a whole at sending people home. So I want to say it was almost maybe the end of February, they made that transition. I think it was 2 weeks into February, like mid-February maybe, they made that transition. Everyone started working from home. And that pivot was, kind of left us saying, okay, how do we work now? What are you guys, how do we fit into your business model of helping you attract talent still when you don't even know necessarily where your people are going to be? So There was a lot of figuring that out early on. But what we came to recognize is within a week or two, I talked to many of the group leaders or the people that run these groups, and they were saying, first week, 2 weeks, they were down 20% productivity, and they were a little concerned. But after about a 2-week ramp up period, and then, fast forwarding sort of a month afterwards, conversations with similar hiring folks or heads of the groups, they were noticing, more of an increase in about 25% production. And if you think about it over, your commute time, what did you see the last Apprentice last night or whatever, all the little ancillary conversations that up to wasting time were eliminated by people working from home. So they've rebounded very well and pivoted very well. So to kind of back up to your question, so at the beginning it was a little turbulent. Things have smoothed out. They're moving forward. Our clients in the beginning of the year, when these questions were coming up, how are we going to work through this? What are we going to do? My suggestions were, well, let's not necessarily think about just right now. This is a pandemic. So what does that look like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever the case might be down the road? Because let's face it, we don't have all the data we need to have to answer those questions. And these people are in the field of trying to answer those questions, for not only us as someone that would take their therapeutics and or vaccines or whatever, but they have to answer a lot of questions from a regulatory perspective and all these different things. So anyway, in the beginning, when COVID really started hitting the States and more and more companies were going to work from home or furloughing or laying off people, our client companies kept people at home, in this space working, and have actually found an increase in productivity. As far as the way they hire, those things were turbulent as well, just as the workflows were turbulent in the beginning, but they pivoted and done well. I would say in that time in February, when most people were being sort of sent home to work from home, we probably had a 33.3 split across the board. 33% of our companies were saying, hey, we're going to wait and see what happens here. We're going to pause hiring for a little while. The middle category or, bulk of people or third of people were saying, we're going to continue interviewing as normal. We're going to continue to, bring people on site when they could. And so obviously that, depending on the geographic area that you were in, would dictate if that was even allowed by the state at that point, or counties at sometimes. And they were going all the way up to an offer stage, but then they would not make an offer until the person could come on site and meet everyone based on that sort of traditional mindset, right?
Yep.
And then the last third of people were, hey, get us the talent. We're going to figure this thing out. And, if we have to, we'll phone interview people, we'll Zoom, interview people, have a day-long interview via Zoom. They can do their presentations. A lot of these people present their thesis work or other publications or talks that they've had in the past to sort of demonstrate their breadth and depth of technical knowledge that they have in their area of expertise. And then based off how those Zoom interviews went, then that last third of the clients that were more aggressive, they decided, hey, we can make an offer based on this. We could check your references just like normal, and we can onboard you virtually and then plug you into the team virtually. And with any of these job changes, there's going to be cultural differences, procedural differences, whatever the case might be. So they were able to plug people in virtually to the teams to meet them, get them antiquated to what they're going to be working on, get them affiliated with the people they need to be affiliated with. And and move things forward. So fast forward till now, which is what, June, I would say 75% of our clients have adapted that. Let's get the talent in. Let's, virtually work this thing and get people on board so we don't miss a wave of talent that they actually need to have to produce their therapeutics.
Sounds like they've done a good job of pivoting.
Really have, yeah. Again, some have done it better than others, but you're also, when you consider the fact that for 100 plus years, however long, I want to say 100 and some years, that the pharmaceutical industry's been around, and they've done things one way for a long time in terms of where they sit their people. Fortunately for technology and different things like this, we have they had the ability to pivot, and they've done it pretty well. That's across the board.
So I'm going to throw a curveball to you, since you're involved in the pharmaceutical business, specifically therapies and vaccines. How do you think that COVID will play out over the next 3 to 6 months?
Well, and I'm no expert in viruses and these types of things, but I talked to a lot of really smart people, a lot of really intelligent guys and women that work within that, vaccines and a lot of different other therapeutic needs and areas. But essentially, there's different thought processes. This particular virus, I think, is mutated differently from what I've been told than other viruses. There's speculation as to why and how and all those good things. But at the end of the day, the common flu does the same thing every year. There's a flu that comes around. Unfortunately, it affects certain people and it can take lives. During this period of time, there's probably less known about this virus maybe than there is the common flu, but they're very similar in nature. They can attack people differently. The folks that I'm talking to, and it's a lot of this is public knowledge, like Moderna and different organizations. Now there's probably 15, 20 pharma companies that are working on a vaccine right now. There are many pharmaceutical companies working on repurposing other drugs that have indications that show that they can be a treatment for this, kind of like a Tamiflu, if you've heard of that before.
Of course.
I believe that's a Merck drug that helps knock out the common flu. They're looking for a treatment to try to help mitigate the damage that COVID-19 can do to a person. And so when I talk to some of these scientists, they're not as excited necessarily about a vaccine as they are a treatment. Vaccines only help a certain portion of the population, but like any virus, it can mutate, and that vaccine might not work, so you've taken a vaccine for no reason. Whereas a treatment, which is what I would prefer, is no matter what virus you get, it helps offset those the secondary issues of the virus. And that's what I'm excited about seeing. And Gilead is actually one of our clients, and a company that's doing that. They're looking at repurposing a drug that they had to help with the symptom or the secondary symptoms of the virus, which can be devastating to some people.
Wow, thank you. That's an interesting perspective. So pivoting again, as someone that's an entrepreneur, what do you have for people that are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs?
Well,
some of the pitfalls that people can make.
Yeah, well, hey, listen, I mean, I've started 2 totally different type of companies, and just to back up just a second, with the gentleman that hired me to be a recruiter, John Chapman, he came to a period in his career where he said, hey, if you're comfortable, we can, you could stick around my organization, help me manage the organization, but I'm going to be retiring, and I'm kind of stair-stepping my way out of the business. And John gave me an opportunity to take the book of business I had built and leave his group and start my own company, which is very unusual. I mean, most people they're just not going to do that. John was gracious enough to do that, knowing that he was thinking about retiring himself. So I've been a very grateful person for someone to give me that opportunity. So from a recruiting standpoint, I know that starting out on an entrepreneurial journey, I knew how to do the work, right? I knew kind of a little bit about business structure. I'd been around business owners. My father was a business owner. His father was. My grandfathers were. So I had an idea of what it looked like, but I had no clue about having procedures, having processes, having best practices, having KPIs, key performance indicators to track employees to make sure we're all working on the same team and moving in the right direction. And then on a side note of that, starting a home health agency, that was a totally different ball game where the procedures it's astounding. You get HIPAA involved, you get all the regulatory governmental agencies that you have to deal with and keep in compliance with. And so you can imagine, right? I mean, here's one business, you get it started, you get it rolling, you're learning how to run a business, what it takes to run a business, all the little nuances and procedures and policies that I didn't even know I needed to have, before. So, and then jumping into another one that's even more regulated and more difficult to navigate. I made a tremendous amount of mistakes. I mean, particularly on the home care side, based on, I followed the state guidelines. I did this, I did that, but there are little nuances along the way that you just don't know until you learn either the hard way or someone educates you or you educate yourself. And I'm trying to remember all the questions. I'm spitting out a lot of stuff at you, but at the end of the day, I know that by starting two different types of companies and growing them up and knowing now what I didn't know then, I could have definitely used help. EO specifically would have been a huge resource for me back then. I wouldn't have qualified, but they have, accelerator programs, this, that, and the other. But having other, expertise in that area would have been just tremendously helpful and would have allowed me to grow with less stress and headaches and probably more quickly.
So I'm not looking to put words in your mouth, but what you're saying to me is how important systems and processes is, right? And
100%.
Under the right circumstance, although you are paying royalty fees and franchise fees, that's really the value proposition of a franchisor to help you with those systems.
Oh, 100%. And beyond that is having the industry knowledge that you just don't have. So I went from recruiting pharmaceutical people that make drugs, right, and test them and make sure they're efficacious and all that good stuff and not toxic, to dealing with nursing and caring for people in their homes and doing it, oh, by the way, under our state regulation, oh, by the way, under Medicaid, Medicare, VA, private pay, all these different things, right? Keeping client patient information secure. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But if you've ever been to a doctor's office and filled out just paperwork to see the doctor once and know the stacks of paper that go into your medical records and keeping those safe and stored correctly and all these different things, yeah, the royalty fees you might pay on a business like that are nominal compared to what you're going to learn the hard way. So I could say that without a doubt.
Well, Jay, this has been a wonderful conversation. We've touched a lot of interesting topics. Just wanted to find out if someone that's listening to this podcast wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
They can reach out via email. It's the letter J followed by my last name, Chapman. So it's JCHAP as in Peter, MAN at HAALLC.com.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Franchise Consultant Podcast. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, give us a rating, and leave a comment on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Explore great resources on our website, franchisecoach.net. And if you'd like more content regularly, follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook. And hey, be sure to listen next time so you're able to realize your dreams.